July 24, 1943. Hours. Feldwebel Heinrich Braun sat at his Würzburg console in the darkness outside Hamburg, watching the phosphor glow of his radar screen. He had tracked 1,000 bombers over the past 18 months. He knew exactly what a Lancaster looked like. A single, clean blip crawling across the green display at 3 centimeters per second. Tonight, at 00:55 hours, his screen showed 1 bomber, then 10, then 100, then nothing but white noise. Braun screamed into his telephone. No one answered. Every operator in the Hamburg sector was screaming the same thing. Something is wrong with the equipment. We're getting false returns. We can't see anything. Somewhere above him, 791 British aircraft were dropping 90 million strips of paper. The solution to the deadliest air defense system in the world cost less than a cigarette. British High Command had buried it for 2 years. The paper sat in the cabinet. The bombers kept dying. Tonight, we're digging it up. To understand what happened over Hamburg, you need to understand what British bomber crews faced every night they crossed the channel. And to understand that, you need to understand one word: Kammhuber. General Joseph Kammhuber built a killing system. The Allies called it the Kammhuber Line. It stretched from Denmark to the middle of France, an invisible wall of radar coverage, searchlights, and night fighters organized with German precision into a grid of death. The system worked like this. Germany was divided into zones. Each zone, roughly 20 miles wide, contained a Himmelbett box. Himmelbett, German for /4-poster bed. Inside each box, 2 Würzburg radar sets, a searchlight battery, and 1 night fighter on standby. One radar tracked the incoming bomber. The other tracked the German fighter. A ground controller watched both blips and talked the fighter onto the bomber's tail. The Würzburg itself was a marvel of engineering. A 3-meter parabolic dish. Operating frequency, 560 megahertz. Wavelength, 53 centimeters. Range, 25 miles. Angular accuracy, 1 degree. It could pick up a heavy bomber at altitude and track it with enough precision to guide a Messerschmitt Bf 110 to within visual range. From the moment a Lancaster entered a Himmelbett box, the crew had approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes before a twin-engine fighter with upward-firing cannons slid beneath them in the dark. The bomber crews couldn't see it coming. The fighter pilot could. He had radar too. Liechtenstein airborne intercept sets that painted the bomber's belly in radio waves. He'd position himself below and behind, match speed, and fire upward into the fuel tanks and bomb bay. The bomber crew's first indication of attack was often the explosion that killed them. This was not combat. This was processing. The statistics were brutal, and every airman knew them. Bomber Command's average loss rate in 1942 hovered between 5 and 6% per raid. That sounds manageable until you do the arithmetic. A tour of duty was 30 missions. At 5% losses per mission, the probability of completing a tour was roughly 21%. 1 in 5. 4 out of 5 bomber crews would not survive their tour. Not wounded, not captured, dead or missing, which over the North Sea at night meant the same thing. Flight Sergeant William Marsh knew these numbers. 22 years old from Birmingham, wireless operator with 103 Squadron. He had completed 11 missions by January 1943. 19 more to go. Every time he climbed into the Lancaster, he did the arithmetic in his head. Every time, he pushed it away and focused on the dials in front of him. The young men who climbed into Lancasters and Halifaxes and Stirlings understood these numbers. They flew anyway. They had a term for the ones who couldn't handle it. LMF, lack of moral fiber. A diagnosis that ended your flying career and followed you for life. So they flew, night after night, into the Kammhuber Line, into the Würzburg beams, into the waiting Messerschmitts, and they died at industrial scale. If you've never been inside a heavy bomber at 20,000 feet over Germany, you cannot fully understand what these men endured. But you can try. The cold came first. Minus 40 degrees Celsius at altitude. The heating systems were inadequate. Frostbite was common. Gunners in their turrets, exposed to the slipstream through open gun ports, wore electrically heated suits that frequently malfunctioned. Men landed with blackened fingers. Some lost them. The noise was constant. 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines at climb power produced a roar that drowned out thought. Communication was by intercom only, and the intercoms crackled with static and interference. The vibration worked its way into your bones. The smell was oil, glycol coolant, and the particular metallic tang of fear sweat in an oxygen mask. And then there was the waiting. Hours of it. Crossing the North Sea in darkness, watching the instrument panel, listening for the call from the tail gunner that meant a fighter had found you. When the searchlights came, everything changed. A master searchlight, radar-directed, blue-white, blinding, would snap onto the aircraft. If it held you for more than a few seconds, the manually aimed lights would converge. A dozen beams locking onto one bomber. The crews called it being coned. Once coned, you were visible to every flak battery within 30 miles. The 88mm shells would start bursting around you, black puffs in the light-filled sky, each one throwing shrapnel in a lethal radius. The pilot would throw the aircraft into evasive maneuvers, diving, turning, trying to break the lock. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. British scientists had figured out how to turn those searchlights off, to make those radar screens go white, to give bomber crews something they hadn't had since the war began, a fighting chance. The solution cost almost nothing. It weighed almost nothing. It was so simple that the physicist who discovered it almost laughed. It had been ready since 1942. The paper sat in the cabinet. The bombers kept dying. The reason why is a story about fear, calculation, and the kind of cold arithmetic that happens in offices far from the killing. The idea was older than the war itself. In 1937, a British researcher named Gerald Touch was working on radar countermeasures at the Telecommunications Research Establishment. The question was simple. If radar works by bouncing radio waves off metal objects, what happens if you fill the sky with metal objects? The answer was simpler: chaos. Touch and his colleagues ran the calculations. A strip of aluminum foil, cut to half the wavelength of the enemy radar, would act as a resonant dipole. It would reflect radio energy with extraordinary efficiency, far more than its tiny size would suggest. A single strip, tumbling through the air, would return a radar echo nearly as strong as a heavy bomber. Drop a bundle of strips, and the radar operator sees a bomber. Drop 1,000 bundles, and he sees 1,000 bombers. Drop 1,000,000, and he sees nothing at all. Just noise. Static. A blizzard of false returns that buries the real targets completely. The physics were undergraduate level. The implications were enormous. By 1942, the concept had been tested, refined, and proven. The strips worked exactly as predicted. Researchers had determined the optimal dimensions, approximately 27 centimeters long for use against the German Würzburg sets. They'd experimented with different materials and settled on black paper with an aluminum foil backing. Black, because it would be less visible to searchlights as it fell. Paper, because it was cheap and light and could be manufactured by the ton. They called it window. It was ready. It was waiting. And it was going absolutely nowhere. The scene played out in a wood-paneled office in Whitehall. March 1942. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, 29 years old, head of scientific intelligence, stood before Frederick Lindemann, 1st Viscount Cherwell, Churchill's personal scientific advisor. Jones had brought the data, test results, photographs, the mathematics of radar saturation. He had brought the casualty figures too. 400 aircraft lost per month, 2,800 aircrew, dead, captured, or missing, every 30 days. Cherwell listened. He did not interrupt. When Jones finished, Cherwell removed his glasses and polished them slowly. Too dangerous. His voice was flat. Cannot be used. Jones felt the blood rise to his face. My lord, the countermeasure is ready. We're losing. Cherwell raised a hand. If we deploy this over Germany, the Germans will recover samples. They will copy it. They will use it against us. Jones had prepared for this argument. With respect, my lord, the Germans have access to the same physics textbooks we do. The principle is not a secret. They likely already know. Cherwell's eyes hardened. And if they don't? If we hand them the weapon that blinds our own radar? London will burn again, Dr. Jones. The Blitz will return. I will not authorize that risk. Jones tried once more. Every month we delay costs 1,400 men. The mathematics. Cherwell stood, signaling the meeting was over. The mathematics, Dr. Jones, include the civilians of London. My answer is no. Jones walked out of that office knowing that the paper would stay in the cabinet, knowing that the bombers would keep dying, knowing that the men who made this decision slept in safe beds while 22-year-olds from Birmingham burned over the Reich. The paper sat in the cabinet. The bombers kept dying. The deadlock held for 18 months. 18 months of raids into the Kammhuber Line. 18 months of Würzburg tracking and Himmelbett boxes and night fighters sliding unseen through the dark. 18 months of 5 and 6% losses while a bundle of aluminum strips gathered dust in a locked cabinet. During those 18 months, Feldwebel Heinrich Braun became one of the most skilled Würzburg operators in the Hamburg sector. He could track a Lancaster at 25 miles and hold the blip steady for the night fighters. He had guided interceptions that killed dozens of British aircraft. The system worked. The system was perfect. Or so he believed. The breakthrough came, as breakthroughs often do, through intelligence. In early 1943, British agents confirmed what Jones had suspected. The Germans had their own chaff program. They called it Duppel, after the location where it was tested. It worked exactly like window, and the Luftwaffe High Command had forbidden its use. Their reasoning was identical to Cherwell's. If we use it, the British will copy it. Our own radar will be vulnerable. Two enemies, same weapon, same fear. Both sides holding a gun to the other's head, neither willing to fire first. The revelation changed the calculus. If the Germans already had Duppel, then using window would not teach them anything new. The secret was already out. The only question was, who would blink first? Jones pressed his case again. This time, he won. In July 1943, Bomber Command received authorization to deploy window. First target, Hamburg. The paper finally left the cabinet. It had only cost 2 years and 10,000 lives. To understand why window worked, you need to understand how radar sees. A radar set sends out a pulse of radio energy. That pulse travels at the speed of light until it strikes something. An aircraft, a ship, a cloud of metal particles. some of the energy bounces back. The radar receiver picks up the return, calculates the time delay, and determines the distance to the target. The Würzburg radar operated at 560 MHz, a wavelength of approximately 53 centimeters. At this frequency, a heavy bomber presented a substantial radar cross-section. On the operator's screen, a Lancaster appeared as a clear, bright blip. Unmistakable, trackable, targetable. But the Würzburg had a vulnerability built into its physics. When a piece of metal is exactly half the wavelength of the incoming signal, it becomes a resonant dipole. It absorbs the radar energy and re-radiates it with remarkable efficiency. A strip of aluminum cut to 27 centimeters would light up a Würzburg screen almost as brightly as a 4-engine bomber. One strip, one false target. The manufacturing was almost insultingly simple. Black paper with aluminum foil backing. 27 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide. Bundled together. 2,000 strips per bundle. And secured with a rubber band. The weapon that could blind German radar cost less than a penny per bundle. The bombers it was designed to protect cost £60,000 each. For 18 months, the penny had lost to politics. July 24, 1943, 1830 hours. RAF Elsham Wolds. Flight Sergeant William Marsh stood in the briefing room with the rest of 103 Squadron. When the curtain pulled back to reveal the red ribbon stretching to Hamburg, a murmur rippled through the assembled crews. Hamburg was heavily defended. Hamburg meant losses. But then the intelligence officer held up something that looked like trash. A bundle of black paper strips, tied with a rubber band. Gentlemen, this is window. Tonight, you will drop these bundles continuously over the target. 1 bundle per minute, through the flare chute. This will blind German radar. Someone in the back laughed. Paper? Against Würzburg? The intelligence officer didn't smile. You'll see. Marsh exchanged glances with his pilot, Flight Lieutenant Davies. Davies shrugged. Orders were orders. They loaded the bundles alongside the incendiaries and climbed aboard. At 21:45 hours, the Lancasters began their takeoff rolls. July 25, 1943. 00:45 hours. Hamburg sector. Feldwebel Heinrich Braun settled into his Würzburg console for another routine night. He had tracked hundreds of raids. He knew the patterns, the approach vectors, the timing, the way the British bombers flew steady courses to maintain formation. His screen showed the first blips crossing the coast. Clean returns. Predictable tracks. Braun called out the coordinates. The night fighters were scrambling. The searchlights were ready. Standard procedure. 00:55 hours. Braun noticed something odd. The lead bomber's blip seemed to be multiplying. 2 returns where there should be 1. Then 5. Then 20. He adjusted his set, thinking it was interference. The image got worse. 57 hours. The screen was filling with returns. 1 bomber had become 50. 50 had become 100. Braun's plotting table was useless. There was nothing to plot. Everything was targets. Everything was bombers. He screamed into his telephone. False returns! Something is wrong with the equipment. The reply came back, panicked. Every station is reporting the same thing. We can't see anything. 0100 hours. Heinrich Braun stared at his screen. 18 months of perfect tracking. Dozens of kills guided by his steady hand. And now, nothing but white noise. Somewhere above him, the bombers he could no longer see were dropping their payloads on Hamburg. July 25, 1943. 1 a.m. 20,000 feet over Hamburg. Flight Sergeant William Marsh pressed his face to the observation blister and watched the chaos below. The searchlights were sweeping wildly, crisscrossing the sky without pattern. Normally, they would lock onto a bomber within seconds. That terrible moment of being coned, trapped in light, waiting for the flak. Tonight, the lights waved like blind men reaching for a sound they couldn't locate. The flak was firing, but wrong. The 88mm bursts were blossoming in empty quadrants, far from the bomber stream. The German gunners were shooting at ghosts. Marsh had been on 11 raids before this one. He knew what a defended target looked like, the mathematical precision of the German system, the searchlights converging, the flak boxing you in. He knew the sound of shrapnel hitting the fuselage, the smell of cordite mixing with fear. Tonight was different. Through his headset, he heard the pilot's voice, quiet, almost reverent. My God, it's working. The paper is actually working. Marsh looked down at the cardboard box beside him, still half full of window bundles. Black paper and aluminum foil. Trash, he had thought during the briefing. Wishful thinking. He fed another bundle into the flare chute and watched it tumble into the darkness. Below him, Hamburg burned. Above him, the night fighters that should have been vectoring toward his aircraft were orbiting uselessly, their controllers screaming coordinates that led nowhere. For the first time in 11 missions, Marsh allowed himself to believe he might survive the war. The main force dropped their bombs on Hamburg that night. The city burned. Incendiaries ignited entire districts. High explosives collapsed buildings and shattered water mains. But the number that mattered was different. Standard loss rate for a major raid on a heavily defended target, 5 to 6%. For 791 aircraft, that meant 40 to 50 bombers lost. 280 to 350 men. Losses over Hamburg on the night of July 24th, 25th, 1943. 12 aircraft. 12. A loss rate of 1.5%. When the surviving crews landed back in England as dawn broke, the intelligence officers were waiting. What happened? What did you see? The answers were the same. Aircraft after aircraft, squadron after squadron. The searchlights couldn't find us. The flak was wild. The night fighters never came. Flight Sergeant William Marsh climbed out of his Lancaster as the sun rose over Elsham Wolds. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something else. Relief. Disbelief. The strange guilt of having survived when survival had seemed impossible. He looked at the empty window box in his hand. Black paper. Aluminum foil. The thing that had saved his life. In a Würzburg station outside Hamburg, Feldwebel Heinrich Braun sat motionless at his console. The screen still showed nothing but static. His telephone had stopped ringing. There was nothing left to report. The system he had trusted, the system he had mastered, was broken. And he didn't know if it would ever work again. The morning after Hamburg, the intelligence reports began arriving at Bomber Command headquarters. 12 aircraft lost, 1.5%, against a target that should have cost them 50. Air Marshal Arthur Harris was not a man given to sentiment. He had sent thousands of young men to their deaths and would send thousands more before the war ended. But even Harris understood what those numbers meant. The Kammhuber Line, the killing system that had bled his command white for 2 years, had been broken in a single night. He ordered the raids to continue. Operation Gomorrah lasted 8 days, 4 major night raids by the RAF. Window was deployed on every British mission. The German defenses remained paralyzed. On the night of July 27th, a firestorm consumed central Hamburg. Temperatures exceeded 800 degrees Celsius. Over 40,000 civilians died. The moral weight of those deaths belongs to another conversation. What matters here is the cost to the attackers. Total RAF losses across all 4 Gomorrah night raids: 87 aircraft, a loss rate of approximately 2.4%, less than half the pre-window average. Flight Sergeant William Marsh flew 3 of those 4 raids. He survived all of them. He completed his tour in November 1943, one of the 21% who made it. The paper had bought him time. The paper had bought him his life. The Germans adapted. They always did. Within weeks, Luftwaffe engineers were developing countermeasures, new radar systems operating on different wavelengths, new tactics, fighters guided by running commentary broadcasts rather than individual ground control. By late 1943, the night fighter force had begun to recover. The losses crept back up. The window of vulnerability, the period when window provided near total immunity, lasted roughly 2 to 3 months. After that, the air war over Germany settled into a new equilibrium, still deadly, still attritional, but different. And the feared German retaliation? The Doppel strikes against England that Cherwell had warned about? They never came. Not at scale. Not in any way that mattered. The nightmare scenario that had kept window locked in a cabinet, German bombers blinding British radar, London burning again, remained a phantom. A theoretical threat that had consumed real lives. The accounting is imprecise. It always is with the dead. Window was ready in early 1942. It was deployed in July 1943. 18 months of suppression. In those 18 months, Bomber Command flew thousands of sorties against German targets. The loss rate averaged between 5 and 6%. Conservative estimates suggest that over 2,000 aircraft were lost in that period, 14,000 aircrew, dead or captured. How many could Window have saved? If the countermeasure had reduced losses by even 40%, the math suggests roughly 5,000 men who might have come home. The real number is unknowable. But the order of magnitude is clear. Thousands of men died who didn't have to. Dr. R.V. Jones continued his work in scientific intelligence throughout the war. After the war, he was knighted. He published his memoirs, Most Secret War, in 1978. Lord Cherwell retained Churchill's confidence until the end. He was never called to account for the window delay. No inquiry was held. No questions were asked in Parliament. The bomber crews who died in 1942 and early 1943 received medals and memorial plaques. Their names are carved in stone at the RAF Bomber Command Memorial in London. Over 55,000 of them, from the whole war. Some of those names didn't have to be carved. The paper sat in the cabinet. The bombers kept dying. Someone made a choice. History does not record every wireless operator who died over Germany in the winter of 1942. There were too many. They blend together in the archives, young men mostly, 19 and 20 and 21 years old. But let me tell you about one of them. Flight Sergeant Thomas Ashworth, 20 years old. From Manchester, wireless operator with 57 Squadron. He had completed 8 missions by February 1943. 22 more to go. On the night of February 14, 1943, Ashworth's Lancaster was coned by searchlights over Cologne. The master beam found them at 22,000 feet. Within seconds, 6 more lights converged. The pilot threw the aircraft into a dive, but it was too late. The flak found them 30 seconds later. An 88mm shell detonated beneath the port wing. The Lancaster broke apart at 19,000 feet. Thomas Ashworth never knew about window. He never knew that in a filing cabinet in Whitehall, there was a bundle of black paper and aluminum foil that could have blinded those searchlights. He knew only that the odds were against him, and that he had to fly anyway. He was 5 months away from Hamburg. 5 months away from the night when the paper finally left the cabinet. He didn't make it. In a warm office in London, a man who would never face a searchlight had decided that was acceptable. The paper sat in the cabinet. Thomas Ashworth fell through the night sky over Cologne. And somewhere, in a Würzburg station that would be blinded 5 months later, Feldwebel Heinrich Braun tracked the burning Lancaster on his screen, a clean blip slowly fading, and called in the kill.